So, first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? You work as a teacher in universities, different subjects, I understand, and also you have started out as a feminist, and then you quit being a feminist, and you actually ended up as the leader of the men's movement in the U.S. So this is quite a journey. Can you say something about
it? It is quite a journey.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I feel like I started out and am now exactly in the same place, which is that I always felt I felt that feminism at the beginning, that its purpose was to be a part of a gender liberation movement, freeing both sexes from the rigid roles of the past to more flexible roles for the future. So that was I envisioned in my mind's eye, and Betty Friedan, who was the author of The Feminist Mystique, who was sort of considered the founder of the women's movement, we would have talks at my house about how the second stage of feminism needs to include men and men's roles and boys roles, and and she and I both agreed that feminism would plateau and women's roles wouldn't really succeed if men didn't also change their roles, that it was a role issue. And so I felt very much, and Gloria Steinem used to say to me, and it said to many other people too, that what we need is a world where we have more women in the place in work and more men at home. And so I felt, this is where we were going.
Yeah.
It was a gender liberation movement.
Yeah.
But then so that was one part of feminism that I was very comfortable with. And so I feel like I haven't really journeyed that much from that part of feminism. What I have come to understand differently than I understood at the beginning, where I have changed, is I never understood that men, I never saw that what we call male power was sort of a pressure on men, a feeling of obligation to earn money that often someone else spent while we died sooner. I never looked at that shadow side of male power at that time. I was only looking at the female disadvantages from that. And so that's the change that I've made. But that would have been a logical change for me to make if I was really looking at both sexes' roles as opposed to just women's roles. So what has made me, I guess, known better as a men's issues person and a boys' issues person is that the more women's issues were understood and the less that boys' and men's issues were understood, the more the things that I said about boys' and men's issues were what separated me out from the gang. Led to feminists turning against me.
So it got into a conflict in a sense.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
I mean, and the conflict started as early as the mid-'70s, when I had my first comment that antagonized feminists on the board of NOW with me in New York City. Was when I said, the early, I didn't know it was the early research at that time, it was the current research at that time, was beginning to show that children of divorce who didn't have their fathers involved were not doing well.
Right.
And so I started to talk about this in the NOW meetings, and the feminist response was, well, we're getting a lot of mail from feminists saying that when they get divorced, they would like to have the right to, or the freedom to be able to be the primary parent, or to move, to marry a different man, leave their old life behind, go to a new area, take the children with them. They want that freedom to do that. Yeah. And I said, I am 100% in support of women's freedom, but when women make the free choice to have children, women and men who make that choice have made a free choice to put their children's benefits and lives in front of their own freedom. And so they started looking at me for the first time, I went from being like this angel hero, sort of like you can do no wrong, to maybe you can do some wrong and some damage here. And so they said, well, this is just the beginning of the research. Why don't you do more research? And so I started, but I could see that as I did more research, the more research I did, the more important I found that dads were in children's lives, and especially in boys' lives. And I knew that that was going to lead to eventually my having a reduction in support on the part of the feminists. And it went from my doing like about 50 speaking engagements a year at universities down to zero, ultimately.
Down to zero.
Down to zero, yes. Yeah. And then there'd be here and there I'd have a speaking engagement. But it was a huge drop-off of income, and I went from being a finalist for a MacArthur Genius Award, which is a big award in America, to being, as soon as it was discovered that I was supporting men and boys, I was just crossed off that list of finalists.
It's interesting, the parallels in Norway, because I remember as a young psychiatrist there was an issue about how women's roles were creating psychiatric or psychic problems, and I was advocating also looking at men's roles and how they were actually making trouble for men, just being a provider and not being in contact with your kids and stuff like that. They just laughed.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Investigate that, you stupid.
Yes,
And also, I'm thinking...
Good luck on that.
Yeah, good luck on that, stupid.
Yes,
yeah.
Right.
And also, what you talk about when about the issues of fathering. There's, of course, we both know there's a lot of research on that, and all the recent research tells us the same story, that fathers are extremely important. But seems that Norwegian psychologists are sort of stuck in the attachment theories, and they even do investigations on how mothers are sort of relating to their child when it's still in the womb, and that's sort of more important than how kids are doing in real terms in their lives. So it's crazy.
Yes, it is 100% accurate that children do in the womb relate to their mother. That I have no problem with. The problem is the research is really clear that when children lose involvement with their father, that there's 3 people who lose. The women lose because they feel overwhelmed, single mothers do. The fathers lose because they feel left out and purposeless. And the children lose on more than 50 different levels. We have in the United States a program called No Child Left Behind. It has failed because we have left the father behind. And when when one parent is left behind, a child is left behind. The children so what I really learned, educated myself with the boy crisis was, first of all, I saw that the boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. I saw that in all 56 developed nations, that was the case. And in all 56 developed nations, what they had in common was the development translated into enough success so that the society could give more permission for women, for divorces, and for women to have children without being married. And it was in those 2 groups that there was a significant amount of dad deprivation. And it wasn't all the children that suffered, it was the ones that had dad deprivation in those 2 groups that suffered. Right. So I found that if you have a divorce, it's not too damaging to the children if you have what I call the 4 must-dos of divorce. And the 4 must-dos are if there's an equal amount of time that the children have with both the father and the mother. That's number 1. Number 2 is that the father and the mother live within about 20 minutes drive time from each other, so the children don't resent the parent that they're going to because they have to miss their soccer game or miss their best friend's birthday party and things like that. Number 3, that there is no bad mouthing or bad body language from dad to mom or mom to dad when the other one isn't around. And the fourth is that there's a consistent, dependable couples communication or relationship counseling. Children whose parents have those four conditions met don't do that badly after a divorce. They do worse than in an intact family, but the variables are confusing and the difference isn't that great. But you're missing any one of those, and the most important of those four being an equal amount of time with father and mother. And so it doesn't make any, the more the conflict is between the father and mother, the more important it is for an equal amount of time. Because, go ahead.
Here the big issue also has been the age of the kid. It's very small, like 1 year, 2 year olds.
Yes.
Has been advocated as almost mistreating the kid that they sleep over with a dad, which I think is terrible that they can claim something like that.
And the thing is that and so all of these things we've been when I started this process in the 1970s, we didn't have the research to counter this. Now we know a few things. One is that the more the father is involved, even with children who are born prematurely, the more quickly those children get out of the hospital, the more quickly they develop motor functioning, the more their IQ goes up. By the age of 11, children with a significant amount of father presence have longer telomeres and longer lives predicted as a result of that, and their IQs go up with father involvement.
Wow.
IQs go down, and telomeres get shorter with a lack of father involvement. And so we have at the age of 1, children do better in social skills and in psychomotor functioning with a significant amount of father involvement, worse without a significant amount of father involvement. So all of these theories were plausible before we did the research to find out that they weren't. Attachment theory has been totally misused, has become a political theory, rather than part of. Are children attached to their moms? Absolutely. It's the mom's job to give the child a combination of emotional security and enough security to separate, not the insecurity to remain only attached to one person.
Right.
The job of a parent is to give that child that balance between emotional security and for the purpose of releasing yourself into the world, not for the purpose of remaining attached. And so that has been an enormously misused theory.
Yeah, and also I think that recent attachment theory shows that kids are attaching to both parents at about the same time.
If they are exposed to both parents, exactly.
Yeah.
And so if you have a self-fulfilling prophecy there, that if the mother does attach only to the child, if the child is only attached to the mother, and then the mother gets rid of the father, then the mother can say, well, look, at attachment theory says this is natural for the child to be attached to me, as opposed to, is this good for the child to only be attached to me?
You mentioned something about these telomeres.
Yes.
And can you sort of put it into real life with saying that if child grows up without a father, they will have shorter lives?
That's right.
Yeah.
That is exactly what. Yes. So telomeres, for maybe somebody in your audience that doesn't know, telomeres are the part of your cell that provide that house a lot of the genes that allow you to keep your life, prevent you from getting cancer, prevent you from getting heart disease and other possible genetic inheritances. And the longer your telomeres are, the more those genes are likely to be healthy and survive. And so by the age, the exact statistic is that by the age of 9, children who have a lot of exposure to their dads have telomeres, children that do not have exposure to dad have on average, when you average boys and girls together, 14% shorter telomeres by the age of 9. The 11 figure was for the other part of what I was mentioning, 11 years old. So by the age of 9, they have 14% shorter telomeres. But the shocking thing is that the boys' telomeres are yet again 40% shorter than the girls' telomeres.
Oh,
From
wow.
start.
In that case.
In that case.
Yeah.
And so that is a metaphor for how both sexes need their dads, but how boys need their dads even more than girls do.
Yeah.
So
This brings me to another question.
Isn't it
really.
amazing?
Yeah,
It
it's
is.
amazing.
It was shocking to read about that.
Yeah.
yes.
And that is, as we know, school and kindergartens are extremely feminized, and for boys living up, especially with single mothers,
Yes.
and they go into schools that are in Norway, 80% of the teachers are women, and the question here has been whether boys are thriving with their female school teacher, and of course. Probably if they have a good time with a female school teacher, there's nothing wrong with them. But it seems to lack the understanding that boys actually need male role models in order to accept themselves as males,
Yes.
to sort of become males.
Yes.
Can you say something about
Yes,
that?
here's the data on that. Boys who have good fathers involved actively and lovingly and with a significant amount of time at home, if they go from a home like that to a female-dominated school system, the impact is a little bit, but it isn't as good as if there's male role models at the school, but it's no big trauma. But when boys go from female-only homes to female-only teachers, they become completely devoid of male role models.
Right.
And so those are the boys that are subject to being more likely to be seduced by drug dealers, being seduced by gang leaders, because those boys are searching for belonging. They're also more vulnerable to sexual abuse. If you saw the movie Spotlight, which talked about priests preying on boys and girls, but mostly boys, there's a comment in there about the priests looked for boys that didn't have fathers. If you look at Hitler Youth searched for boys without dads because they knew those boys would be most vulnerable to having a bigger purpose. If you look at ISIS recruits, both the boys and the girls who are ISIS recruits have a very high percentage of lack of father involvement. Again, searching for a bigger purpose, but they're vulnerable to their testosterone being channeled destructively rather than constructively. When boys' testosterone is channeled destructively, it becomes one of the world's most dangerous forces. Your mass shooters are about 80% boys who do not have significant father involvement. Your ISIS recruits, the same, and your prison population, about 90% of the male prison population are boys without father involvement.
I think that's extremely important what you're saying there, and I think there's very little awareness of this in Norway. Actually.
Yes, yes,
Thank you for
really,
that.
in the United States as well, very little awareness of this.
Also, when you have a boy that's sort of already well into what you call the boy crisis, and they go to schools with female teachers mostly,
Yes,
and maybe get into this danger seeking and getting to a not good place in life.
yes,
And then they need help from public health service. And in Norway, most of the psychologists are female.
yes.
How can we give boys that already need help in a system like this?
Yes. Well, the first thing we really have to do is and what I'm trying to do now in the United States is to, next year, I'm working with the government to try to create a very significant program on boys' issues. And the number one thing is to focus on, what I'm suggesting is that we have a father warrior program, and to have boys see themselves from an early age as being needed as fathers. And that if you don't have a good father involvement, nothing else can be easily taken care of. The boys that have the good father involvement at home, all female school teachers, not a big problem. Boys that don't have the father at home, all females, big problem. All female social workers, the same thing. You never get to that social worker if you have a father at home.
No, right.
So, you know, and so that's the number one thing. Now, the number two thing we can do is to I'm suggesting a male teacher corps, where we, instead of having just scholarships for women into STEM professions, we have scholarships for boys to become elementary school teachers.
Yeah.
And those scholarships remain scholarships as long as those boys go to school for a couple of years and teach in an elementary school. And then the same type of program for social workers and so on, that especially because the biggest problem in schools are boys, not girls, and especially because they're mostly from fatherless homes, there should be a disproportionate amount of social workers and teachers that are male than female.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you are actually saying that there is a gender-sensitive way of looking at these jobs.
Yes, yes.
And this also seems to be totally out of focus in Norway. I mean, I have been trying to say that these are gender-sensitive works. You know,
Absolutely.
and it's like nobody wants to listen to that.
It's batting. But what you are doing is exactly what is needed. You are organizing with Gutorum and with Jan and the other men here. You're creating international awareness. You are part of the solution, and a major part of the solution. And the only way, I mean, you know, when Betty Friedan got involved with feminists at the beginning, it was 4 or 5 or 6 women at her house. You know, it started small, and people need to. You and I know that when we bring up these issues, we're looked at with suspicion and as a possible devil, you know, and as a possible anti-female. All the things we are exactly the opposite from, and so it takes people with a great deal of courage to say, you know, this is the only way to be pro-female is to take the burden off of women's backs of not being the only parent. Those of our daughters that are heterosexual, they're going to want boys who are productive, not boys who are purposeless.
Yeah.
This is, you know, that the feminism has to, in many ways, gone from I am woman, I am strong, to I am woman, I've been wronged. You know, and that is, you know,
the victim role.
Competing for victim power is not a good. That's not female positive.
But it's extremely, that kind of power is extremely effective in our society.
Yes.
And I think that many women get caught in it, in a sense. And it's all started out with the Marxist analysis of genders, you know.
Yes.
And with men as the oppressors and the women as the oppressed.
Yes.
And now it has become like this. I wonder, what's your advice to young women to avoid this getting stuck into that kind of thinking and that kind of role?
Yes, I think one is to understand that we need women's help to put out there in the culture that the women, are needed to speak up and take leadership roles, and saying that we want for women to be truly empowered is for women to be able to have the choice of having have a man in their life who helps with that. So, for example, the thing that we hear women talk about a great deal is, I feel it's unfair to be that men can be have-it-all men, but women can't be have-it-all women. Well, so then let's ask the question, how can a woman be a have-it-all woman? So what is a have-it-all woman first? Have-it-all woman is usually considered a woman who has a top-notch job, who has a good marriage, and who has children who are raised well. Well, women can have that by finding men who are interested in being home with their children and being full-time dads, if they will. And then the woman can focus full-time on the career. Women who focus on their career do not neglect their children. They tend to come home and be with their children at least a reasonable amount of time, especially on weekends. And so the children are raised effectively. She has a happy marriage if she perceives the man who's not earning significant income as a man who's a man. If she is critical of him because he isn't earning significant income, the marriage will fall apart.
Well, that seems to be a pretty regular thing. I mean, I've had a lot of couples in therapy, and in those cases where the male has sort of taken that position, it's often been hard for women to respect it.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And that is,
they're not that advanced yet.
Right. And that's where your leadership is so important. But that's the message that we need to transmit to school teachers and to parents. That if you want women, if you want your daughters to have it all women, you can do one of two things. The woman can have it all, stress out and die early, and have a lot of respect and be totally stressed. And will she be ranked as happy? Underneath it, no. She'll be going to a therapist, she'll be taking medications, she'll be overwhelmed. The children will oftentimes not turn out well, and she'll have a high reputation, miserable life. And so we have to communicate this to our daughters, and that's why your work is so important.
What about the angry men? I'm often getting that question. What about the angry men? And my perspective is that men need to have their full life potential energy, and if they get angry, they get angry. But I think that's something else than what people are called angry men.
Yes.
Protesting against everything and getting into victimhood themselves.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. Well, I think there's 4 solutions to angry men.
Yeah.
The first 3 are listen, listen, listen. And the 4th one is do not affiliate with the anger, but listen to it. So when I was with the feminist movement, there were angry women like Valerie Solanas, who wrote the Scum Manifesto, the Society for Cutting Up Men. And this woman, Valerie Solanas, shot Andy Warhol and basically ruined his career. And so I was asked about, how can you be involved with a movement that has people like Valerie Solanas and the Society for Cutting Up Men?
Right.
And I said, because I want to see I don't want to be blocked to see the best intent of feminism by somebody who's an extreme version of it. So we can't be blinded by people who are angry. We have to listen to their anger, because usually when you listen to people's anger, they feel heard, and if they feel heard, that anger begins to diminish.
Is that the same with these angry women? Because that was my next question. Because my sense is that a lot of radical feminists are, angry at all times.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's like a sense of hating men.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't know why this is, but do you have any ideas about that?
Well,
What is it, and how to relate to that?
Well, many of them did not have good father figures. Gloria Steinem was one who did not have a good father figure, and they didn't feel listened to by men, and oftentimes by women either. And so they needed to be listened to. But there's a big difference between being listened to and then having your complaint become the ideology and the activity of the movement. And that's where I draw my line.
Right.
So a man who is a woman hater, I have to say to him, tell me why, what's your background, what's your story, what's this? But I will not adopt a woman hating position in anything I do. I will not support your outcome, but I will support hearing what has created your trauma.
So what you actually say is that a lot of these angry women tends to make ideology out of their own personal traumas.
Well, worse than that. They have made ideology out of their traumas, and they have also made, they have created social and political policy as an extension of their traumas.
Right.
And that has been, and that's where I said I would draw the line. You want to have an ideology from your traumas. I will listen, I will listen, I will listen. You want to start creating social and political policy and an attitude change for the whole culture based on your traumas, I will draw the line there.
So how come, sensible women let these women do the talking?
Because sensible women were often overwhelmed by everything else they had to do in their life, just like sensible men are often overwhelmed by supporting their family, by doing things. It's, we were talking about this yesterday, and I said to you, often social change is led by, unhealthy social change is led by unhealthy people. Because unhealthy people are likely to have more time on their hands to do the leaders. And so it's really rare that social change is being led by people like you who are healthy. I experience as a very healthy person, as I do with Gatorum. And so these, but you see that there's not a huge numbers of very healthy people. Many of the men who are overwhelmed, they're incels or they're MGTOWs, and MGTOWs meaning men going their own way. They just say, I can't handle it. It's more than I can handle. Or incels, I'm not voluntarily celibate. I'd love to be involved with a woman, but I'm involuntarily celibate because I don't see a way of being involved with a woman that I can handle. And of course, from a Norwegian point of view, this means if more men withdraw from the world and from society and from work and from having children, there'll be a much smaller tax base. And so you're going to be ending up having women pay more taxes for more social services. That is not going to be healthy for the culture just on an economic basis. In the United States, these men who hurt in the extreme cases with the guns available that we are addicted to in the United States, they can potentially become mass shooters, and those mass shooters put fear into many schools and homes and communities, and so but there's a very simple solution to mass shooters, just two things: dads in, guns out. But the conservatives won't hear guns out, and the liberals won't hear dads in. So that's the dilemma that I'm with them, and that's caught between a pest. What's the caught between
pest and the plague? Pest and the plague.
Pest and a plague. Pesticide and a plague. Is it pest and a plague? Pest and a plague. Right.
It's interesting because in Norway also it's like the conservatives seems to have more understanding of the father issues, and the left parties looks like they have no interest in this issue, and it's very irritating for people like me being social democrats.
Yes.
So where do you go? Do you go to the right then, or what do you do?
Well, I mean, that's exactly what's ended up happening. Here I was working with the Obama administration for 8 years, trying to get a White House Council on Boys and Men, and was not successful. Even though they approached me to begin with to be a supporter, an advisor to the White House Council on Women and Girls, and I said I'd be happy to be an advisor to the White House Council on Women and Girls, which they ended up never forming, by the way. So I said, but there's also a need for a White House Council on Boys and Men. And they said, okay, develop a proposal. I got the leading experts in the country on this issue, the head of the Boy Scouts, et cetera, to focus on this White House Council on Boys and Men. We got all the way up to President Obama, just outside of his office, and then got vetoed, and we were never allowed to approach President Obama on the issue. So after the 8 years of working with them, and then I approached 7 of the Democratic candidates, interviewed them to try to get them to bring up the boy crisis in debates. None of them did. And then I went to the Trump administration, and they were responsive. They said, yes, we have a need for this. I had 3 publicists for the boy crisis that were liberal mainstream publicists, almost nothing. 1 conservative publicist for a much shorter period of time, huge amounts of publicity. And so, on every level, your summary statement that conservatives are more, you in publicizing this event reached out to liberal and conservative media, and what I heard from you was that there was much greater response from the conservative media than the liberal media. And so this is true. Unfortunately, every place that I've inquired around the world that I'm aware of, this pattern is the case. And this, so I was thinking about writing a New York Times op-ed saying how the Democrats will defeat the Democrats.
This is a complex issue, and there's a lot of work needing to be done to have both sexes sort of meet and become friends again,
Yes,
sort of.
yes.
Where do we start?
I think with listening.
Listening.
And so, for example, to translate that into real life things means that we, instead of having a hashtag #MeToo monologue, we have a hashtag #MeToo dialogue. It's very important that women speak up and have a safe space to speak up. But it's also important that they believe that their hashtags #MeToo are not the only thing that exists in male-female relationships. Otherwise, we just continue what we've been doing. We have always had a battle of the sexes, but the battle of the sexes, if you look back at the old movies, have been mocking women and mocking men. Whereas recently, it's gone from a battle of the sexes to a war in which only one side has shown up, and women have shot the bullets and men have put their heads in the sand and hoped the bullets would miss.
I think that's a fair ending of this discussion, Warren. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing to make this, the courage that it takes to be both liberal and a leader in gender transition, and somebody who's functional and healthy as a human being. This is exactly the leadership we need, and so I really thank you much more than me.
I thank you.